The story begins with a man named Gi-hoon, whose life is filled with struggles and sadness. Once a regular office worker, Gi-hoon lost his job and now barely gets by doing small, irregular jobs. After his divorce, he moved back in with his elderly mother, while his ex-wife remarried and took their daughter to live with her new family. Despite these hardships, Gi-hoon tries his best to be a good father. He always wants to see his daughter smile, even though his life is far from stable. One day, Gi-hoon decides to buy an expensive birthday gift for his daughter to make her happy. Desperate for money, he steals cash from his mother and heads to the racetrack to gamble. Unexpectedly, luck appears to be on his side. He wins the race and doubles the money he had. Overjoyed, Gi-hoon calls his daughter, his voice full of excitement, and promises her a special gift that evening. But just as his happiness starts to grow, it is quickly shattered. A group of loan shark's henchmen find him, demanding that he repay his overdue debts immediately. Panicking, Gi-hoon runs as fast as he can to escape them. In his haste, he accidentally collides with a young woman on the street. After a long chase, the debt collectors catch up and corner him. Frustrated but trying to negotiate, Gi-hoon promises to repay his debt soon. To show his sincerity, he offers to pay half of it right away with the money he won. But when he reaches into his pocket, he is shocked. The money is gone. It was revealed that the woman he bumped into earlier had stolen everything. Knowing this, the loan sharks are furious and beat him up as a warning. They give Gi-hoon one final chance to pay, but under one horrifying condition. He must sign a contract agreeing to give up his kidney if he fails to settle the debt within the agreed time. With no other options left, Gi-hoon reluctantly signs the contract, using blood from his nose to leave his fingerprint. Feeling hopeless and ashamed, Gi-hoon reflects on his terrible situation. He has not only failed to buy a birthday gift for his daughter, but also failed to treat her to a nice meal. His guilt weighs heavily on him as he imagines her disappointment. Gi-hoon feels like a complete failure as a father. Now, he faces the grim reality of being deeply in debt and possibly hated by his daughter forever. While sitting at a train station, drowning in despair, a well-dressed man approaches Gi-hoon. The man speaks calmly and confidently, offering him a way out of his troubles. He explains that Gi-hoon could earn a huge amount of money, enough to clear all his debts, by joining a special game. The man hands Gi-hoon a business card with a phone number and tells him to call if he's interested. Later that night, driven by desperation, Gi-hoon dials the number. After agreeing to participate in the game, he waits by the roadside as instructed. A pickup truck arrives shortly after, and Gi-hoon gets in. To his surprise, everyone in the truck's passenger area is unconscious. Before he can react, Gi-hoon himself is drugged, and all his belongings are taken. When Gi-hoon finally wakes up, he finds himself lying on a bed in a massive room filled with hundreds of other people. The loud sound of classical music wakes up the other participants. Soon after, Gi-hoon notices they are all wearing identical tracksuits, each with a unique number printed on it. His number is 456, indicating he was the last participant to join. Meanwhile, in another area, the organizers of the game are watching everything unfold. They are dressed in red uniforms and masks, observing the participants on screens. Their leader, a masked figure called Frontman, wears a dark brown outfit and seems to control the entire operation. As the game begins, Gi-hoon meets some of the other players. Among them are Sang-woo, his childhood friend who was involved in a money laundering scandal, Il-nam, a frail elderly man, Ali, a migrant worker from Pakistan, and Dok-soo, a gangster with a tough attitude. Gi-hoon also encounters two women, Min Ryong, a single mother, and Sabyuk, a defector from North Korea. To his shock, Gi-hoon realizes that Sabyuk is the same woman who stole his money during his escape from the debt collectors. Gi-hoon was about to confront Sabyuk in anger when the door suddenly opened. A group of masked staff dressed in red costumes entered the room, catching everyone's attention. One of them stepped forward and announced that the players would compete in 6 games over the next 6 days. The winners of these games would receive an incredible cash prize that could change their lives. The staff then handed out a letter of agreement for all participants to sign. The document contained 3 important rules. First, players could not quit the game. Second, anyone who refused to play would be eliminated. Third, the game could only end if the majority of players agreed to stop it. Gi-hoon hesitated, feeling uncertain about what he was getting into, but when he saw the elderly grandfather confidently signing the agreement, Gi-hoon decided to follow suit and sign the paper. Once everyone confirmed their participation, the players were led into a pink room with unusual decorations. The walls were bright and colorful, but the atmosphere remained tense. The staff then asked the players to stand one by one in front of the wall for a photograph. These pictures, they explained, would be displayed on the screens during the games. After the photo session, the players were instructed to climb a set of stairs leading to the location of the first game. When they reached the game area, the players found themselves in an open field with a large, creepy robot standing at the far end near a tree. Many participants looked around, confused and unsure of what was about to happen. Then, a voice announced the rules of the first game. It was a red light, green light game. When the robot faced the tree and said green light, players could run toward the finish line. But if the robot turned around and said red light, everyone had to freeze completely. Any movement during red light would result in elimination. At first, the rules seemed simple and harmless. However, the truth quickly turned into a nightmare. The word elimination wasn't just about being removed from the game. It meant death. Players who moved when they weren't supposed to were immediately shot. Realizing this, the field immediately erupted into chaos as people panicked and ran toward the gate, hoping to escape. But gunfire came from every direction, and players began falling one after another. Eventually, the number of participants dropped rapidly as bodies littered the field. Despite the horrifying scene, the game continued with the remaining players who managed to stay still. Gi-hoon, along with a few others, struggled to keep up with the game, dodging both fear and the deadly consequences. The tension was overwhelming, with corpses scattered everywhere, but those who survived had no choice but to focus on reaching the finish line. As the game progressed, some players successfully made it to the end before the timer ran out. Il-nam, the elderly man, smiled with relief as he crossed the finish line. Dok-soo, Sabyuk, and Sang-woo also managed to survive the game. However, Gi-hoon was still far behind, desperately trying to reach the finish line. With only 20 seconds left on the clock, Gi-hoon nearly stumbled when the robot suddenly announced red light and turned around. Frozen in fear, he almost lost his balance, but Ali, a fellow player, caught him just in time. Together, they pushed forward and crossed the finish line with only seconds to spare. Unfortunately, the remaining participants who were still on the field when time ran out were immediately eliminated and shot on the spot. After the first game ended, the survivors were escorted back to the large room they had started in. Out of the original 456 participants, only 201 were left alive. The remaining players were shaken, horrified by what they had just witnessed. Panic and fear spread among them as they realized the deadly nature of the games. Seeing the growing unrest, the organizers allowed the players to vote on whether to continue or end the game. Before the vote began, the staff revealed the current prize amount, which had already reached over 25 billion won. However, they warned that if the game was stopped, no one would receive any of the money. The participants were filled with worry and doubt. On one hand, they were deeply tempted by the enormous cash prize they could win. On the other hand, the cost was their very lives. As the voting continued, the group was evenly split. Some wanted to continue the game, while others wanted to quit. Finally, it was Il-nam's turn to vote, the last one to decide. The elderly man surprised everyone by choosing to stop the game. According to the rules, if the majority agreed, the game would end. And with Il-nam's vote, the decision was made. After the vote, all participants were sent back to their homes. Gi-hoon returned to his life, but was haunted by the horrifying experience. The next day, he went to the police station and reported the cruel game syndicate that had caused so many deaths. He told the officers about everything, how the participants were drugged, the deadly games, and the brutal eliminations by gunfire. However, the police didn't believe him. They thought Gi-hoon was lying or making up stories. Frustrated, Gi-hoon showed them the business card the man had given him and asked them to call the number. When the police dialed it, the call connected to an ordinary woman making Gi-hoon's claims seem even more unbelievable. With no evidence to support his words, the police dismissed him and asked him to leave. After Gi-hoon left, a policeman named Jun-ho arrived at the station. He saw the card Gi-hoon had left behind and became curious. Jun-ho then asked the officers about the man who had reported the case. It turned out Jun-ho had a personal connection to the situation. His long-lost brother had a similar card. Jun-ho suspected that his brother might have been involved in the same deadly game. Meanwhile, Gi-hoon returned home, only to find his mother missing. After searching for her, he discovered she was in the hospital. The doctor informed him that his mother had been suffering from severe diabetes for a long time and urgently needed surgery. However, she had chosen to leave the hospital because she couldn't afford the treatment. Hearing this broke Gi-hoon's heart, filling him with sadness and guilt. Desperate for money, Gi-hoon went to his ex-wife's house to ask for help. But instead of sympathy, he was insulted and ridiculed by her husband. The man even threw Gi-hoon out and forbid him from seeing his daughter. Enraged, Gi-hoon lost his temper and hit the man. His daughter witnessed the fight, leaving Gi-hoon feeling even more ashamed. In the end, Gi-hoon left the house, realizing how far he had fallen. Shortly after, Gi-hoon found himself at rock bottom. He was on the verge of losing both his daughter and his mother, who was gravely ill. His debts loomed over him like a dark shadow, leaving him with no way out. Apparently, Gi-hoon wasn't alone in his despair. Other participants who had left the game were also trapped in their harsh realities, drowning in debt and hopelessness. After much thought, many of them, including Gi-hoon, made a difficult decision. They would return to the game. That night, the returning participants waited at the designated location. Once again, they were picked up by cars just like before. This time, they were more prepared, knowing a little of what awaited them. However, unknown to the game organizers, Jun-ho was secretly following one of the cars. Determined to find his brother, Jun-ho infiltrated the vehicle and knocked out one of the masked staff. Disguising himself in the staff uniform and mask, Jun-ho managed to blend in with the organizers. Not long after, the participants were gathered in a room and given new clothes to wear. Unnoticed by the organizers, some players had smuggled sharp weapons and small tools, hoping these items might help them in the upcoming games. Out of the original 201 players, only 187 decided to return. Not only that, the prize money also had grown even larger, increasing the stakes for everyone. Meanwhile, Jun-ho, now disguised as a staff member, did his best to blend in, though he felt nervous and out of place. In the midst of this, Min Ryong went to the bathroom and was startled to see Sabyuk sneaking into the ventilation system. Sabyuk was trying to spy on the organizers and learn more about the next game. Peeking through the vents, Sabyuk saw staff members preparing large amounts of cotton candy. She couldn't figure out what kind of game would require so much cotton candy. Suddenly, a staff member entered the room, forcing Sabyuk to hurry out of the vent before she was caught. The next day, the participants were led to the game arena, unsure of what awaited them. Along the way, Sang-woo quietly asked Sabyuk about what she had seen the previous night while sneaking around. At that moment, Sabyuk mentioned seeing the organizers making large amounts of cotton candy. Hearing this, Sang-woo guessed that the next game might also be based on a childhood game, similar to the first round. Sang-woo's hunch was correct. When the game was revealed, the participants were handed slabs of hardened sugar with shapes imprinted on them. The goal was to scrape out the shape using a small needle without breaking it. Sang-woo, recalling a childhood game, chose the triangle shape, knowing it was the easiest to carve. However, he kept this knowledge to himself and didn't warn his friends about the difficulty of the other shapes. Gi-hoon ended up with an umbrella shape, one of the hardest, while Il-nam chose a star. The participants were given 10 minutes to complete the task. Anyone who failed to scrape out the shape perfectly would be eliminated, and in this game, elimination meant being shot on the spot by the masked organizers. Fear spread quickly among the players, and the room filled with panicked whispers. Everyone began working cautiously, trying not to break their sugar slabs. Min Ryong, who had managed to smuggle a matchstick, secretly heated the tip of her needle, making it easier to melt the sugar and carve out the shape. Those who had chosen simple shapes like triangles and circles worked quickly and successfully finished the task. Sang-woo, Sabyuk, and Ollie were among them. Meanwhile, Jun-ho, who was disguised as a masked staff member, struggled to carry out his duties without drawing suspicion. As the timer ticked down, there were only 3 minutes left. Gi-hoon and several others were still struggling with their challenging shapes. Gi-hoon, drenched in sweat from the pressure, suddenly noticed something. A drop of his sweat landed on the sugar, slightly softening it. This gave him an idea. He realized the sugar was easier to scrape when it was wet, and the pattern was already imprinted on the back. He began licking the sugar rapidly to loosen the shape. Seeing Gi-hoon's clever trick, other participants followed suit, licking their sugar slabs to soften them. Thanks to this method, Gi-hoon and several others, including Il-nam, managed to complete the game just in time. Eventually, they passed the round and were allowed to move on to the next stage. However, not everyone succeeded. One participant, frustrated and desperate, attacked a committee member by stabbing a needle into their mask. Chaos erupted as other organizers quickly executed the players who hadn't completed the task, ensuring no further rebellion. At one moment, the attacker managed to grab a rifle and aimed it at the organizer, forcing him to remove his mask. When the organizer complied, revealing his face, another masked staff member immediately shot the player. Moments later, Frontman entered the arena. He assessed the situation coldly and, without hesitation, shot the organizer who had removed their mask. It was revealed that even the organizers were bound by strict rules. Removing their masks in the game arena was forbidden to protect their identities. The only place they were allowed to unmask was in their private quarters. After the chaos, the scene shifted to a large room where the surviving participants gathered. The mood was tense, and everyone was visibly shaken. Soon after, the organizers brought trays of soju and boiled eggs for the participants, instructing them to line up to receive their food. The players, still hungry and thirsty from the exhausting challenge, quickly formed a queue. However, Doksu and his gang took advantage of the situation by rejoining the line after already receiving their food. The organizers had only prepared enough for the remaining participants, so some players were left without anything to eat or drink. One of the players, angry and frustrated at not receiving a snack, confronted Doksu. But Doksu was ruthless and far stronger. He beat the man mercilessly, leaving him battered and lifeless. The violent scene shocked everyone in the room. Gi-hoon, deeply disturbed, turned to the organizers and demanded they take action against Doksu. Despite this, the organizers of the game paid no attention to what happened outside the official rounds. The death of a participant didn't bother them. Instead, it made the prize money grow larger, as the number of players continued to decrease. This gave Doksu a sinister idea. He decided to kill off more contestants during the night to reduce the competition and increase his chances of winning. With his gang, he plotted to carry out their violent plan while the others were asleep. However, the other participants were already suspicious of Doksu's intentions. Many of them had secretly formed small groups to protect one another. These groups worked together, preparing for the possibility of an attack. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, some of the committee members were secretly working with one of the players. This player was a doctor who performed autopsies on the bodies of eliminated contestants. The rogue committee members were harvesting the organs of the deceased participants to sell on the black market for extra profit. In return for his help, the doctor received secret information about the upcoming games, giving him an unfair advantage. One of the committee members even manipulated the CCTV footage in the control room to hide their illegal activities. They worked in the shadows, careful not to let the frontmen or the other organizers discover their scheme. As night fell, the participants were told to rest, and the lights in the large sleeping hall were turned off. Once the room was plunged into darkness, Doksu and his gang began their brutal attack. Within moments, the quiet room turned into a battlefield filled with chaos. Screams of terror and the sound of violent clashes echoed through the space. The participants, blind in the darkness, struggled to protect themselves. Gi-hoon, after ensuring that Sang-woo and Ollie were safe, began searching for Il-nam as the old man was not in his bed. To their relief, they found Il-nam hiding on the top bunk of one of the beds, where he had climbed to avoid the violence. From above, Illinois Nam shouted desperately, begging everyone to stop killing each other. His cries seemed to reach the organizers. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, and the mass committee members entered the room to restore order. The scene was horrific. Blood covered the floor, and lifeless bodies lay scattered everywhere. The organizers quickly began clearing the room, removing the corpses and cleaning up the mess. After this gruesome night, the remaining participants were gathered in another room. This time, they were instructed to form teams of 10 people for the next game. The doctor, who had already been informed about the game through a secret deal with the rogue committee members, joined Doksu's team, knowing it would give him a higher chance of survival. Other players, unaware of the upcoming challenge, randomly formed their teams. Gi-hoon, however, chose to team up with his closest allies, Sang-woo, Ali, Illinois Nam, and a few others. When the game was revealed, the participants were stunned. It was a deadly version of tug of war. Unlike the traditional game, this one took place high above the ground. The losing team would be pulled off the platform and fall to their deaths. As Gi-hoon's team realized what was ahead, they grew nervous. Their team had 3 women and an elderly man, making them appear weak compared to the other teams, which were filled with strongmen. Gi-hoon could feel the tension rising as they became an easy target for the stronger teams. When it was their turn to compete, Gi-hoon's team was matched against a much stronger and more intimidating group. Sang-woo felt hopeless, convinced they couldn't win. But Il Nam, with a calm and wise demeanor, shared a few tips and strategies to increase their chances. He explained that tug of war wasn't just about strength, it required teamwork, trust, and smart tactics. During the game, Illinois Nam's strategy worked well at the start of the tug of war. Gi-hoon's team gained an advantage by pulling together in rhythm and staying united. However, as the match continued, the difference in physical strength between their team and the opposing team became obvious. Gi-hoon's team began to lose ground, struggling to hold on as the opposing team pushed harder. In the critical moment, Sang-woo shouted a bold and risky plan. He told his team to take 3 quick steps forward, a move that could catch the opposing team off balance. The others hesitated, unsure if they should take such a dangerous gamble. But in the end, they decided to trust Sang-woo. With perfect timing, they executed the plan, pulling with all their strength. The sudden move worked, and the opposing team fell to their defeat. Against all odds, Gi-hoon's team won the match. After the tug of war, the number of remaining participants dropped to 40, and the prize money doubled. The eliminated participants' bodies were collected by the organizers, who called the doctor to harvest their organs. This gruesome task continued in secret, with Junho assigned to accompany the committee during the organ delivery. As he watched the horrifying operation, Junho could only silently observe, unable to intervene. Once the doctor completed the organ harvesting, he demanded information about the next game as his reward. But the committee told him they hadn't received any instructions from the frontman about the upcoming round. Panic gripped the doctor, who knew Doksu would kill him if he couldn't deliver the promised information. Desperate, the doctor lashed out, attacking one of the committee members with a surgical knife and killing him. He then fled through the dark, twisting corridors of the facility, eventually reaching the arena for the next game. Soon after, one of the corrupt committee members caught up with him and tried to calm him down, warning him not to draw Frontman's attention to their illegal activities. But unknown to them, Frontman was already aware of their actions. Without hesitation, Frontman appeared and executed the corrupt committee members, including the doctor. Although Frontman didn't seem to care about the organ trafficking itself, he had zero tolerance for breaking the rules of the game. To him, fairness and equality among participants were crucial, and giving one player an advantage was unacceptable. Meanwhile, Junho continued his investigation, walking through secret hallways with another committee member. They entered a hidden passage used for organ delivery. At the end of the passage, however, the committee member suddenly turned on Junho, holding a knife to his throat. It turned out they had been suspicious of him all along. Caught, Junho removed his mask, revealing his true identity. But before the committee member could act, Junho pulled out his gun and shot him in the head. After eliminating the threat, Junho infiltrated the frontman's room, determined to find clues about his missing brother. As Frontman and his team hunted down the rogue organizers, they discovered the secret passage Junho had used. There, they found the body of the committee member Jun-ho had killed. Examining the corpse, frontman found a bullet casing and quickly realized it came from a police-issued gun. Realizing an intruder was in their midst, he ordered his men to search every corner of the facility to find the intruder. Inside the frontman's quarters, Jun-ho carefully searched room after room. Eventually, he came across a hidden archive room filled with files. The shelves were packed with records of participants from previous games. Jun-ho focused on the files from the year his brother had disappeared. After a tense search, he finally found proof his brother had indeed been a participant in the game. While this was happening, the remaining participants were led to the location of the next game. Along the way, they were horrified to see the bodies of the corrupt committee members and the doctor hanging from the ceiling. The gruesome sight left them shaken. At that moment, the game organizers issued an official statement, apologizing for the disruption and warning the participants that anyone who attempted to cheat would face the same fate. Moments later, the participants were asked to pair up for the next game. With 39 players left, one person wouldn't be able to participate. As everyone scrambled to find a partner, most avoided Il-nam, the elderly man. They assumed the game would require physical strength, and with his frail condition, they were afraid of losing if they teamed up with him. Gi-hoon, feeling pity for the old man, chose to partner with him. Once everyone had found their partners, it was clear that Min Ryong was left without a partner. The committee escorted her to another location, leaving the rest uneasy about her fate. The group was led to the game location, where they were each given 10 marbles. The rules of the game were simple but brutal. Players had 30 minutes to win all of their partner's marbles. Whoever managed to collect 20 marbles by the end would pass the round and move on to the next stage. There were no restrictions on how the marbles could be taken. Players could use any strategy or method they wanted. The committee would only observe to ensure the rules were followed. Gi-hoon, partnered with Il-nam, struggled at first. Il-nam seemed distracted, wandering aimlessly and ignoring the game entirely. Gi-hoon grew frustrated, trying to explain the rules over and over. His patience wore thin, and he eventually snapped, yelling at the old man. This outburst seemed to bring Il-nam back to his senses, and he finally agreed to play. The two decided on a simple guessing game. One player would hold a few marbles in their hand, and the other had to guess if the number was odd or even. Surprisingly, Il-nam guessed correctly several times in a row, steadily gaining marbles while Gi-hoon's pile shrank. Gi-hoon began to panic as the committee members watching them seemed ready to act if he lost all his marbles. Meanwhile, Sang-woo was paired with Ali. They played fairly at first, and Ali quickly gained the upper hand, collecting more marbles than Sang-woo. Ali, with his kind and gentle nature, felt bad for Sang-woo and hesitated to take advantage of his position. However, Sang-woo reminded him coldly that one of them had to lose, and losing meant death. Desperate, Sang-woo resorted to trickery. He exploited Ali's trusting nature, swapping Ali's marbles with stones he had secretly gathered. By the time Ali realized what had happened, it was too late. Sang-woo emerged as the winner, leaving Ali betrayed and devastated. Elsewhere, Sabyuk was paired with a young woman named Ji-young. Instead of competing, the two chose to talk. Ji-young opened up about her tragic life, revealing that she had no one left after killing her abusive father. On the other hand, Sabyuk was fighting to survive for her younger sister, who was still in an orphanage. Realizing that Sabyuk had a reason to live, Ji-young deliberately let herself lose, giving Sabyuk the victory. Ji-young smiled softly, accepting her fate with quiet bravery. Back with Gi-hoon and Il-nam. The game continued until Gi-hoon was down to his last marble. On the final round, Gi-hoon guessed incorrectly and appeared to lose. But just as the committee prepared to act, Il-nam's senility seemed to kick in again. The old man forgot his guess, giving Gi-hoon an opportunity to turn the game around. Slowly, Gi-hoon began winning back marbles, using Il-nam's forgetfulness to his advantage. By the end, Gi-hoon had 19 marbles, leaving Il-nam with only one. As time ran out, Il-nam suggested they play one final round, with both of them betting all their marbles. Gi-hoon hesitated. He couldn't see the point of such a gamble since he already had so many marbles while Il-nam had only one. It was then that Il-nam revealed the truth. He had been pretending to be senile all along. He had known about Gi-hoon's tricks but chose to let him win. Gi-hoon was overcome with guilt. He realized how low he had stooped, deceiving an old man to save himself. Feeling ashamed, he apologized sincerely to Il-nam. But Il-nam didn't seem to mind. With a kind smile, he handed his last marble to Gi-hoon and thanked him. He expressed gratitude for Gi-hoon's companionship and care throughout the games, even in the face of such despair. Il-nam hugged Gi-hoon tightly, his voice trembling with emotion. He thanked Gi-hoon for staying by his side and said these moments had been the happiest days of his life. 30 minutes had passed, and the game was over. The participants who didn't have any marbles left, like Il-nam, Ali, and Ji-young, were declared unsuccessful. One by one, they were eliminated by being shot. Once the marbles game ended, the committee quickly began removing the bodies of those who had lost. Meanwhile, the remaining participants who survived returned to the main room. To Gi-hoon's surprise, Min Ryong was there, alive and unharmed, even though she hadn't participated in the marbles game. Her survival raised questions, but no one dared to ask. After the game concluded, Frontman returned to his quarters. He was on high alert, suspecting that an intruder had been in his room to gather information about the games. Time was running out, as important investors were scheduled to visit soon. As a result, he instructed his men to search the place thoroughly and eliminate the intruder before their arrival. The next day, the VIP investors arrived at the game site. Like the frontmen and the committee, the investors wore extravagant masks to conceal their identities. These VIPs were the game's financial backers, betting large sums of money on the outcomes. The frontman greeted them with great care, knowing it was his duty to ensure they were well treated during their visit to watch the games live. Jun-ho, still hiding within the facility, saw an opportunity. He knocked out a committee member and disguised himself as a waiter to infiltrate the VIP's room. There, he secretly recorded the investors and their activities, determined to collect enough evidence to expose the syndicate behind the cruel games. The fifth round of the game was about to begin. The remaining participants were brought into a room and asked to select vests numbered 1 through 16. These numbers would determine the order in which they would play the next game. A scramble broke out as players tried to claim numbers in the middle of the sequence, hoping to avoid the risks of going first or last. When it was Gi-hoon's turn, only numbers 1 and 16 were left. He hesitated, torn between the options. Determined to take charge of his fate, he decided to choose number 1. But just as he reached for it, another participant begged him for the number, terrified of being the last player. Feeling pity for the man's desperation, Gi-hoon relented and took the final number, 16. Once everyone had their numbers, the participants were led to the game's location. It was a high platform, similar to the tug-of-war arena. Before them stretched a long bridge made entirely of glass. The bridge was divided into pairs of glass panels. One panel was strong and could hold a person's weight, while the other would shatter under pressure. The players had to cross the bridge within 15 minutes, stepping only on the safe glass, and the order of crossing was determined by their vest numbers. The rules of the game caused immediate distress among the players. Those with the early numbers realized they would have to guess blindly, risking their lives to find the safe panels. Their mistakes would give the players behind them a better chance of survival. On the other hand, the players with later numbers faced a different challenge. They would have to rush across the bridge before time ran out. As the game began, the first players stepped onto the bridge. Many guessed incorrectly and fell to their deaths, their screams echoing through the arena. The tension grew unbearable as time ticked away. Those in the middle of the line grew impatient, yelling at the hesitant players in front of them to move faster. Eventually, Dok-soo found himself in the lead. Standing on a safe panel, he refused to take another step, declaring that he wouldn't move and would ensure no one else made it out alive. The players behind him were furious, but too afraid to confront him. At that moment, Min Ryong, who had been observing quietly, decided to act. Fueled by anger and determination, she leapt onto Dok-soo's panel. Without hesitation, she wrapped her arms tightly around him. At that time, she said that Dok-soo had to come with her when crossing. Then, with a final burst of strength, she pulled Dok-soo down with her, sacrificing herself to eliminate him. Eventually, only 4 players were left standing on the fragile glass bridge, while the rest had fallen to their deaths. Among them was a player who had worked in a glass factory. With his knowledge, he could distinguish the sturdy glass panels from the weak ones. Thanks to his skill, Gi-hoon, Sang-woo, and Sabyuk managed to follow safely behind him, stepping only on the safe panels. However, the frontman, observing this from the control room, decided to make things more difficult. He ordered the lights in the game arena to be turned off, plunging the bridge into darkness. Without any light, it became nearly impossible for the players to identify the correct glass panels. Time was running out, and the glass factory worker hesitated, unsure of his next step. Sang-woo, growing impatient as the timer ticked dangerously close to zero, snapped. With less than a minute remaining, he pushed the glass worker off the bridge, sacrificing him to reveal the correct panel. With only seconds left, Gi-hoon, Sang-woo, and Sabyuk sprinted across the remaining panels and reached the end of the bridge just as time ran out. As they landed safely, the bridge behind them shattered into pieces, sending shards of glass flying in all directions. The sharp fragments rained down on the players, leaving their bodies covered in painful cuts and scratches. In the VIP room, the wealthy investors watched the game with twisted satisfaction, laughing and enjoying the spectacle. The horrifying deaths of the other players didn't bother them at all. Among the waitstaff was Jun-ho, still disguised as a server. He carefully observed the VIP guests, blending in while secretly gathering evidence. One of the VIP guests, intrigued by Jun-ho, called him over and led him to a private room. Once inside, the guest revealed his perverse intentions, beginning to undress in front of Jun-ho. Disgusted and furious, Jun-ho pulled out his gun and pointed it at the man. Demanding answers, he forced the VIP to confess everything he knew about the game. At the same time, Jun-ho recorded the confession as evidence. After obtaining the information he needed, Jun-ho incapacitated the VIP and quickly escaped. Using diving equipment, he fled the game's location, diving into the sea to avoid detection. However, the frontman soon discovered his absence and dispatched his men in boats to hunt him down. Jun-ho swam to a nearby island, exhausted but determined. He retrieved his water-damaged phone and attempted to contact the police inspector. He sent the evidence he had gathered and pleaded for backup to arrest the syndicate running the games. Unfortunately, the remote island had no signal, leaving his phone useless. Desperate, Jun-ho climbed to higher ground, hoping to find a stronger signal. Despite his efforts, he couldn't establish a connection. Before long, the frontman and his men arrived on the island, tracking Jun-ho's diving gear. They spread out to search for him. It didn't take long for the frontman to locate Jun-ho, cornering him near the edge of a cliff. As Jun-ho prepared to defend himself, the frontman removed his mask. At that moment, Jun-ho froze in shock. Standing before him was his long-lost brother, the very person he had been searching for all this time. Trembling, Jun-ho demanded to know why his brother had become part of such a cruel and deadly game. The frontman offered no clear explanation. Instead, he raised his gun and shot Jun-ho, sending him tumbling into the sea below. Back at the game location, the remaining participants, Gi-hoon, Sang-woo, and Sabyuk, were given time to rest before the next round. They were escorted to a private area to change into fresh clothes and eat a proper meal. While changing in the bathroom, Sabyuk discovered that a shard of glass had pierced her stomach during the bridge collapse. Blood poured from the wound, leaving her weak and in pain. Desperate to stop the bleeding, she tore a strip from her uniform and wrapped it tightly around her injury to slow the blood loss. At dinner, the three survivors were served a luxurious meal, the first proper food they'd had since entering the game. Gi-hoon and Sang-woo ate ravenously, devouring every bite. But Sabyuk struggled, her pain making it hard to even lift her utensils. She ate only a little before pushing her plate away, her face pale and strained. After the meal, each participant was given a small dagger, a chilling reminder that survival in the next round would require not just skill, but the will to defend themselves against their remaining opponents. Gi-hoon, still furious with Sang-woo for his cruel actions, began to plot revenge. He approached Sabyuk after dinner, hoping to form an alliance and work together to win the final game. However, Sabyuk barely responded. Sitting weakly, her condition had worsened significantly. She looked pale and exhausted, her voice barely above a whisper. Sabyuk then shared her last wish with Gi-hoon. If she didn't survive and Gi-hoon did, she begged him to take care of her younger brother, who was alone in an orphanage. After expressing her heartfelt request, Sabyuk collapsed, unable to hold herself up any longer. It was only then that Gi-hoon noticed her uniform soaked in blood. She had been bleeding heavily from the glass shard injury she sustained earlier. Panic-stricken, Gi-hoon ran to the door, pounding and shouting for the committee to send help. Moments later, the door opened. But instead of medics, the organizers entered carrying a coffin meant for transporting deceased players. As Gi-hoon processed what was happening, he turned back to Sabyuk, only to see Sang-woo standing beside her. To his horror, Sang-woo had slit Sabyuk's throat, ending her life. Gi-hoon rushed to Sabyuk, cradling her lifeless body in his arms. His heart filled with rage, and he attacked Sang-woo in a blind fury. Sang-woo, however, remained cold and emotionless. He defended his actions, saying he only wanted to end Sabyuk's suffering. The following day, the final game began. Gi-hoon and Sang-woo, the last two players, faced each other for the ultimate prize. The game they were to play was the Squid Game, a childhood game they both knew well. The rules were simple. The attacker had to pass the defender and reach the finish line without crossing the boundaries. Gi-hoon was assigned the role of attacker, while Sang-woo took the role of defender. In a separate room, the VIP investors and the frontmen watched the intense showdown, eager to see who would win the 45.6 billion won prize. Both players were still equipped with the daggers they had been given in the previous round, turning the game into a deadly duel. Under the pouring rain, the two childhood friends clashed fiercely. They fought with desperation, both determined to survive and claim victory. Sang-woo landed several stabs on Gi-hoon, but Gi-hoon, driven by sheer willpower, managed to endure the pain. Gathering his strength, Gi-hoon turned the fight around, leaving Sang-woo weakened and lying helpless on the ground. Gi-hoon stood over his friend, dagger in hand, ready to end the fight for good. But as he stared at Sang-woo, memories of their friendship flooded his mind. He couldn't bring himself to kill his best friend. Instead, he drove the dagger into the ground beside Sang-woo and turned to walk toward the finish line. However, the game's rules meant that if Gi-hoon reached the finish line, Sang-woo would automatically be executed for losing. Torn between following the rules and saving his friend, Gi-hoon stopped and turned back. He approached Sang-woo and pleaded with him to end the game together. If they both agreed, the game would stop and they could leave with their lives intact. But Sang-woo refused. With a trembling hand, he grabbed the dagger and did the unthinkable. As blood poured from his neck, he used his final moments to ask Gi-hoon to take care of his mother. Gi-hoon screamed in anguish, catching Sang-woo as he fell. In the pouring rain, Gi-hoon held his childhood friend's lifeless body, tears streaming down his face. Moments later, Gi-hoon was declared the winner of the Squid Game. He was entitled to the full prize of 45.6 billion won, but his victory felt hollow. After 6 days of brutal survival, he was sent home, but the memories of the horrors he endured stayed with him. To maintain the game's secrecy, Gi-hoon's eyes were covered, and his hands were bound. The frontman accompanied him in a limousine, handing him an ATM card containing his winnings. Yet, Gi-hoon felt no joy. Hundreds of lives had been lost, including those of Sabyuk and Sang-woo, all for this blood money. His heart was heavy with grief, and he couldn't shake the pain of being the only survivor. When he crossed paths with Sang-woo's mother on the street, he couldn't even bring himself to speak to her. The memory of Sang-woo's dying request haunted him, filling him with guilt and sorrow. Gi-hoon's suffering seems endless. When he finally returns home, he is met with a heartbreaking reality. His mother has passed away. Overwhelmed by grief and exhaustion, Gi-hoon collapses beside her lifeless body, holding her tightly as he cries out into the empty room. All the pain, loss, and guilt from the past weeks consume him entirely. The scene shifts to 1 year later. Gi-hoon's life remains stuck in the shadow of the traumatic games. He lives aimlessly, unable to heal from the horrors he endured. One evening, as he sits by the river lost in thought, a flower seller approaches him and hands him a single rose. Inside the rows, Gi-hoon finds something familiar, a card, just like the one that led him to the game before. This time, instead of a phone number, the card has an address written on the back. Without hesitation, Gi-hoon decides to go to the address. When Gi-hoon arrives, he is shocked to see Il-nam lying in a bed, surrounded by medical equipment keeping him alive. Gi-hoon thought Il-nam had died during the marbles game, but now he realizes the truth. Il-nam had not been executed because he was the mastermind behind the games, the host, and the boss of the frontman. Weak and nearing the end of his life, Il-nam begins to explain everything. He tells Gi-hoon that despite his wealth, he felt no joy or purpose in life. This emptiness gave him the idea to create a playground, a place where he and others like him could find entertainment, just as they did when they were children. Unexpectedly, his idea was embraced by other rich individuals, and together, they built the deadly game arena and orchestrated everything. Hearing this, Gi-hoon's anger boils over. He yells at Il-nam, furious that he and the investors could sacrifice hundreds of innocent lives for their amusement. Il-nam, however, defends himself, calmly pointing out that no one was forced to join the games. Every participant, including Gi-hoon, made the choice to return after being given the chance to leave. He insists that the responsibility lies with the players and their own decisions. Before taking his final breath, Il-nam thanks Gi-hoon sincerely for staying by his side during the games. He says Gi-hoon brought him happiness in his last moments, giving him the companionship he longed for. With that, Il-nam closes his eyes and passes away peacefully. After Gi-hoon leaves, the frontman quietly enters the room. Standing beside Il-nam's lifeless body, he gently closes the old man's eyes, showing a rare moment of respect. Il-nam's death seems to awaken something in Gi-hoon. Determined to rebuild his life, he starts anew. He cuts and dyes his hair, marking a symbolic fresh start. He then fulfills the promises he made during the games. First, he visits the orphanage to pick up Sabyuk's younger brother. He brings the boy to Sang-woo's mother, leaving him in her care. Before departing, Gi-hoon hands them a suitcase full of money, his way of honoring both Sabyuk and Sang-woo's memories. With his affairs settled, Gi-hoon plans to reunite with his daughter in the United States. But at the airport, something catches his eye. He spots the same mysterious man who first recruited him at the train station, playing the Dachi game with another potential victim. Gi-hoon immediately runs toward them, but by the time he arrives, the recruiter is gone. Left with only the card given to the new victim, Gi-hoon dials the number printed on it. The call is answered by none other than the frontman. Gi-hoon speaks with unwavering determination, vowing to track down the game's organizers and bring an end to their cruel operation. Instead of boarding his flight to the United States, Gi-hoon turns back. He abandons his plan to join his daughter, choosing instead to dedicate himself to dismantling the sinister syndicate. The story ends with Gi-hoon walking away, resolute in his decision to fight against the horrors he once survived, no matter what it costs him. So the moral of the story is, life's already a tough game. No need to join one where the prize is trauma and regret. And if someone offers you snacks or a glass bridge, just say no and go find your marbles instead.